And so basically between 1890 and 1914, this language spreads all across Europe like wildfire. Major teams such as Inter Milan, Barcelona, 1899, all of these are established. They bespeak Britain's commercial might, not her political might. This language is exported by English architects, by electrical workers, by Brazilian textile engineers who go to England to learn about that industry. So it really bespeaks England's economic might, not her political might. Her political might are actually bespoken by the languages of the rugby and, of course, cricket. Parenthetically, since two important terms about cricket, if I can suggest, the best book ever written on sports is by the great Trinidadian Marxist C.L.R. James, called Beyond the Boundary, in which he demonstrates in a Gramscian way, brilliantly, how this kind of completely stylized game, in which winning is hard, because actually not only does it last 5 days, because for aristocrats time doesn't matter. Moreover, it's played in whites. Why is it played in whites? Because, of course, that's where you keep the riffraff out, because they don't have money to do the laundry, and they would look dirty. It's interesting why, in fact, basically the British upper class invents these markers when it spreads these sports in the second half of the 19th century. Tennis, ditto. And what C.L.R. James demonstrates beautifully, how this game actually becomes the sports language or the culture of, in fact, the world. It's a much more complicated, I know that you have many of your literature background. This is, if you want to do some post-colonial work, this is it, okay? This shows you how, in fact, of course, it's a form of domination, but it's also an immensely, how should I say, pleasurable one. And also one that, in fact, you learn. And what is so fascinating, how it beautifully shows, and this is my whole line about sports, is that sports, by dint of always trying to win, and of course this being, they become absolutely quintessentially meritocratic. And they, in fact, become, thereby, inclusive. So what he shows so beautifully is that, at least on that cricket field, these white aristocrats and the local black population, who would otherwise not be in anything equal, but in that they are. And in fact, indeed, the white aristocrats lose on occasion, and they accept the loss. Okay? It's a great book. The other thing that I want, since we're in Canada, the great article by Orlando Patterson of Harvard and Jason Kaufman, Orlando Patterson, in my book, the best interpreter of American race relations by a long shot. They actually took my article and my book about why is there no soccer in America, and they asked, why is there no cricket in Canada? Which is a very brilliant question. I mean, by any measure, Canada should be a major cricket country. And why isn't it? Very briefly, great article, American Journal of Sociology. They basically argue that, in fact, it isn't that, because the cricketers in Canada, unlike in these other countries, actually pursue it as a phenomenal form of status exclusion. In other words, they don't want to extend the game. They actually use the game for it to remain completely self-contained and elitist. So this soccer spreads between 1890 and 1914 for many reasons. Number one, it's a relatively simple grammar. A relatively simple grammar. It is, in fact, a relatively simple and cheap way of playing it. You can play it on any surface with anything. We could easily have a wonderful game right here. Okay? The goal's here. You know, we roll up my jacket as a ball, 2, 4, and 4. Great surface here, not a problem. Okay? You can do this. It's also prima facie intelligible, which, by the way, cricket and baseball are not. Okay? because in fact, it's the defense that has the ball. It's not, you know, there are, again, great studies on this. This is very clear, okay? There's these guys, and they're trying. It also is a game that doesn't need much equipment. It's actually very exportable, and yet it is resisted everywhere that it is exported. Let me give just two examples. Germany. In Germany, it arrives, and it is vehemently opposed as Engländerei. Okay, and it's interesting that the German authorities sense that this is something that they can't resist. And the gymnasts, because in Germany, of course, you have Turnen at the time, as the big athletic endeavor, okay, a martial art. Really, this is a much more modern one because it entails teams, it entails leagues, it entails a new, more complex structure. And what the Germans do, actually, is they Germanize the game. So, for example, all the way until the World War I, and they say, okay, we have to accept it, but what we will do is we will set up, literally, in front of every ground, the English words and their German equivalent. So it's goalkeeper, Torwart, corner, Eckball, okay? In other words, using German words to fend off this English danger. Interestingly, as I've shown with my friend Roman Horak, this actually does not pertain in a multi-ethnic Austria. So to this day, when you go to a match in Vienna, you will hear people say, der Referee for referee, und der Foul, und ein Beck, und ein Penalty. Okay, in other words, all these English words, which of course they don't know it's English, because in fact the Austrian Empire was much less worried about foreign terms. In that sense, it had already known the language strides in the Viennese Diet, in Vienna Parliament, and they were much less worried about this pure Germanification. Okay? By the way, ditto, of course, with Italy. So, for example, in Italy, even though this is a completely English import, of course, as you well know, or you should know, that the game, of course, is called calcio. Okay? Now, what is calcio? Calcio is a Florentine game, which is played with feet on some occasions, but it has nothing to do with what really became popular in Italy. So, but very early on, because it was an issue of nationalism in Italy, in Germany, in Spain, okay, you actually, so the Italians use their term calcio, lega calcio, to sort of basically give it to this English import, which still remains in such teams as, for instance, Internazionale. It was an international team, okay, which typically, of course, the fascists rename Ambrosiana, okay, because, of course, Internazionale was not what the fascists stood for. So, very briefly then, this becomes the language, the sports language all over Europe. And my argument is that if, in fact, taking it again from political sociology, the great Lipset-Lokan insights about political parties, they argue that by looking at all advanced industrial democracies, that if you, in fact, have created this party space by World War I, short of a dictatorship, it's actually very hard for new parties to succeed. Not impossible, but very hard. So whoever enters, basically by the time industrialization takes off really, namely, of course, the parties of the left being the latest ones, it's harder for others to actually arrive. And that's exactly what happens in sports. So my argument is that whoever enters the sports space by 1914 or 1920, the barrier of entry becomes immensely high for newcomers. Not impossible, but immensely high.